Hello. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the next live reading of the Midas Protocol, part of the Midas Files, the first book. Tonight I decided my prop is kind of a cigar. It's an Oliva. I'm not going to smoke it in my house. I would probably get killed for that. But anyway, just kind of feels like it goes with it a little bit here. So anyway, today's reading is chapter 2 of the Midas Protocol, which is called Misbegotten Fortune. And really, in this chapter, we get to meet we get to meet the primary protagonist, Hank Raglan. And we also get to meet the people that he has to deal with almost throughout the whole book and the series. We get to meet his love interest, Addison, and see how that goes. We get to meet his biggest rival, Jack Barron's, and we get to see how that goes as well. And so this is the very first chapter where we jump into it. It takes place in 1989, Pittsburgh's North Side. My inspiration for this chapter was the current world headquarters of Alcoa, basically. I used to work at Alcoa in the mid-90s, and I worked in corporate communications for a little bit. I was a corporate communications assistant, and I got a chance to work on the executive level there for a little bit. And a funny story is that when I did work there, I didn't realize kind of what an opportunity that appeared to be. Essentially, someone that worked there on the first floor told me, hey, do you know you're like the only one in your 20s on that floor up there? Everyone else is in their 60s. And I said, wow, I never really thought of it that way. And that was a really cool thing. The building itself was kind of new to Pittsburgh's North Side. Pittsburgh's North Side at the time was not what it is today. Today you have PNC Park, you have Heinz Field, and you have all sorts of restaurants and development, and it's really nice now in the North Shore. It's like kind of the destination area when you come to Pittsburgh. But back in the late 80s, it wasn't like that. You had Three River Stadium and not much else, and a bunch of dilapidated kind of buildings. So the breaking of the ground of the Alcoa Center at the time, which is where this chapter is pretty much set, kind of kicked off that whole era of development in Pittsburgh's North Side. It was called the North Side, and then it became the North Shore, and it got all fancy and everything. But really, the Alcoa building was the first building that really was ready to change the look and feel of Pittsburgh's North Shore into what it is today. A decade later, they would build. The corporate center opened in the late 90s, but not too long after that, in the early 2000s, PNC Park opened. And PNC Park is just beautiful. And from there, lots of things went up and continue to go up today. So chapter 2, Misbegotten Fortune, basically takes place at the Alcoa building and it was inspired when I worked there. I kind of came up with the idea for the story in the late 90s, and it became the perfect setting. Once I started working there, I was like, wow, this is a great setting. I have to use this. So that's kind of how it got to be there. In the book itself, I renamed Alcoa to Unalco, which, Universal Aluminum Company, I called it, instead of the Aluminum Company of America, which is what Alcoa is. So with that in mind, let's get into chapter 2, Misbegotten Fortune of the Midas Protocol. Chapter 2, Misbegotten Fortune. Monday, December 11th, 1989, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I'm going to try to angle my camera just a little. Hank Raglan sat in the guest waiting area of the top floor of Unalco's World Headquarters. He waited patiently for Tony Laporte to finish a call. It was early Monday afternoon, and Unalco was feeling empty as the end of the year approached. Hold on one second here. Little pop-up. Sorry about that. The office was quiet as Hank sat. He could hear Christmas music softly playing on the small radio behind Mr. Laporte. It was Frank Sinatra's I'll Be Home for Christmas. I'll be home for Christmas. Okay, a good friend of mine, we like to do karaoke, and I always end up doing the Sinatra songs, but okay, we'll get into that some other time. 10 minutes passed. Hank looked at his watch. Considering how long Mr. Laporte's call was taking, Hank wondered if he would ever be home for Christmas. He admired the view. The entire corner office space presented a panoramic view of Pittsburgh's downtown area across the banks of the Allegheny River. Of course, from this angle, Hank could not see Pittsburgh's North Side neighborhood. That part of Pittsburgh needed refreshing, to put it kindly. Nonetheless, Hank admired the dramatic view from Mr. Laporte's office. It included Pittsburgh's iconic yellow-painted iron bridges, both flanking Unalco's brand-new building on this side of the Allegheny River. Hank couldn't imagine having a workspace with a view like Tony's office. It sure beat the hell out of the windowless cubicle farm at the Unalco Technical Center. The Unalco Technical Center, the UTC, was a campus-like research facility located in New Kensington, about a 45-minute drive east of Pittsburgh. Though the UTC was itself located on an idyllic campus-like environment, Hank hardly saw the light of day from his basement office there, and the commute was awful. As a junior materials science researcher, Hank and a few others shared their floor space with plant management offices and the grounds crew locker room. Once, someone had procured too many mops, and they had been placed throughout Hank's department until the room could be found for the janitorial tools. Hank was not complaining. What did he expect? He was an intern only 2 years ago, and they hired him full-time. He made just under $30,000 per year and was not about to complain. That was not a bad sum of money for someone fresh out of college. Moreover, Hank had enough money to buy his dream car, a used forest green Jeep Cherokee. He could afford an apartment and still buy beers on the weekend. Life was good enough already. What more did he need? As far as work was concerned, he was lucky in one respect. He and his colleague, Benjamin Laws, had recently been given temporary workspace on the first floor of this gorgeous building. Apparently, Mr. Laporte wanted Hank and Benny to be more accessible during the coming months. Other than knowing today's meeting had something to do with the report Hank wrote about an unfinished alloy collecting dust in their research department, he did not have many details as to why he and Benny needed to be co-located at the World Headquarters. He figured that would soon change, after Mr. Laporte hung up the phone. Mr. Laporte swiveled back and forth on his chair as he talked, with little sign the conversation would end. Hank wondered if he would be as accomplished as Mr. Laporte one day. If I were the CEO, would that be a good thing or a bad thing? Is this what I want out of life? A dichotomy of thoughts about good things and bad things bandied about in Hank Raglan's mind as he waited. If the Steelers miss the playoffs and Chuck Noll retires, will that be a bad thing? Or maybe a good thing? The sun peeked out and shined through the practically invisible glass exterior of Unalco's modern world headquarters and into Mr. Laporte's corner office. The walls were giant panes of glass that ran from ceiling to floor. The rare Pittsburgh sunlight caught Hank and Mr. Laporte in the eyes and caused him to squint. Laporte, still chattering away, stood up, holding the phone between his jaw and shoulder. He walked over to a 3-high cherry-stained filing cabinet. The phone cord extended beyond its limits and began to pull Mr. Laporte's desktop phone dangerously close to the edge of his desk. Laporte retrieved and finagled a device that sat on top of the filing cabinet. Vertical blinds slid silently across the windows, creating momentary bars of prison light on Mr. Laporte and Hank. As Hank waited for Mr. Laporte to wrap up his call, Addison Moore walked into the area on her way to Mr. Laporte's executive desk. Dressed in a professional gray business skirt and white blouse, Addison looked well put together in both business and personal aspects. The skirt was very businesslike, but fitting enough to show that she was no stranger to the gym. Her tied-back blonde hair lent Addison a serious demeanor beyond her young age. Her black-framed glasses gave her an intellectual flair that Hank found attractive. She was a lovely woman in every sense. Hank fidgeted and tried not to stare. Addison acknowledged him with a cordial, polite smile as she placed the manila folder on Mr. Laporte's executive desk. Mr. Laporte, still gabbing on the phone, made an acknowledging gesture to Addison as he talked. He spun in his chair and returned to the conversation. Addison walked past Hank for a second time. She didn't even look at him as she exited the area. Fair enough. Hank was happy to get her attention the first time. And because she didn't acknowledge him again, he could study her in greater detail. If Addison and I hooked up, would that be a bad thing or a good thing? Hank heard the man ramble on the other end of Laporte's horn. Mr. Laporte glanced at Hank with an apologetic expression, then turned to the wall clock. Mr. Laporte made a rolling motion with his fingers again to Hank as if to say he wished this gas bag would wrap it up soon. Next, he made a chattering puppet gesture with his free hand. Hank smiled. The rumors were true. The famously well-regarded Mr. Laporte was as down-to-earth as they came. Hank settled back into his chair and wondered what business Addison Moore had with Mr. Laporte. She was the global media relations manager for Unalco. Hank guessed that Addison was around his age, in her mid-20s. Already she was a woman of considerable influence at Unalco. Hank was aware who she was because many of the emails that were sent from corporate communications were sent by Addison. Her name was on everything that came out of communications. News releases, internal announcements, external communications, industry updates. No doubt she was reporting the words of her superiors, but it was clear she was a smart woman with great writing and communication skills. Hank greatly admired those traits. As Mr. Laporte was finishing his phone call, he motioned for Hank to have a seat in the more comfortable leather executive guest chair that faced his mahogany desk. Hank noted that the desk was as fastidious and neat as the man who sat behind it. Mr. Laporte was older, late 60s at least. He was a taller, fit, proud man in good shape. Mr. Laporte had a beaming, paternal, but youthful air about him. He wore a well-tailored, gray conservative, single-breasted suit paired with a blue button-down Oxford shirt. An impeccable red and white silk rep tie completed his attire. His face was narrow, his hair was white as copy paper, and his aquamarine blue eyes sparkled with wisdom and kindness. This was a man that saw the positive in life, no matter what life threw at him. Hank hoped one day to have that same face of comportment and halo of positive energy that was the hallmark of this first-rate gentleman. The call ended, and Mr. Laporte put the phone down. "How are you doing, Mr. Raglan?" Mr. Laporte asked. He used both hands to ease himself out of his chair and walked from around his desk to shake Hank's hand. His grip was firm and tight. "Do you mind if I call you Hank?" "Certainly," Hank answered, returning the firm handshake in kind. I don't mind." Laporte laughed. "You can call me Tony." Mr. Laporte stared into his eyes. Hank held the eye contact with confidence. After a pause, Laporte returned to his chair. "I've read the report you did on Evium. Impressive." Hank smiled. "It was straightforward, sir. Tony? I had help from several engineers." "I appreciate your modesty," Laporte interjected, "but you seem to have a real knack for material science. This was an old project you dug up. You actually finished this report with missing information and filled it in yourself somehow. I checked with the other engineers. No one came up with the solutions that you documented. Our lead metallurgist, who has studied alloys for decades, was blown away by your report. Based on the evidence I had, I thought the solutions made sense. Naturally, I wanted engineering staff to confirm my conclusions. Also, Dr. Bingham's research was simply brilliant. I just put the missing links in there." "You did exactly that. You solved a major problem. That alloy was too advanced for us to complete until you took a crack at it." "Thank you, sir. Tony, what is the methodology that you use to come up with those conclusions?" I visualized it in my mind first and then compared the research we had to where I believed it supported the final product. Visualization. Like a certain part. The whole thing, sir. It's like I have a photograph in my mind of how all the science should work together. The parts that were not in the report seemed easy to connect when I visualized the final alloy. To do a little cigar book switch, because, hands get a little tired after a while. Tony smiled. You remind me of my old friend Larry Bingham. He never had a chance to finish his research on Evium. He could explain complex subjects in a way that made sense, and I could make actionable decisions on what to do next. Lawrence Bingham was a very dear friend of mine. Yes, of course, sir, Hank answered, forgetting to call him Tony once again. You and Lawrence Bingham founded this company. He was much more than a co-founder, Hank. Larry was a brilliant engineer. Larry was the inventor, a limitless innovator. Without him, there would be no Unalco. He did remarkable things, and he was on the cutting edge of metallurgy. Hank detected a subdued note of sadness from Tony, as if recalling better times with a friend that had been dear to him. Hank knew that Larry Bingham and his wife had been murdered years ago during a home invasion. It was common knowledge at Unalco and in Pittsburgh. The details surrounding the murders were murky, but the media reports indicated the Binghams had been dismembered and then incinerated in a fire after having been robbed. Well, I imagine Mr. Bingham might say similar things regarding your business leadership, Mr. Laporte, Hank said. He realized the slip, but calling him Tony still struck Hank as a tad premature. There was a brief pause, and it appeared Tony was getting ready to segue in another topic, but Hank could see something else was on his mind. He turned from Hank and then gazed out the window between the slivers of the blinds. After a minute or so, Tony turned and faced Hank. At first, he appeared bothered, but that countenance faded and turned into one of fondness. He beamed with pride at Hank. No matter what methodology you use to solve problems, Hank, your paper on Evium is frankly brilliant. You articulated several aspects of this new alloy and technology that several of our best engineers could not solve in the past 5 years, Tony said. Evium was left unfinished, half finished. When my former partner passed away, I think some of the senior researchers gave you the Evium project as a joke, like asking the new knight to pull Excalibur out of the stone on his first day. Thank you, Tony. That's quite a statement. Hank's mouth felt dry, and he needed a glass of water. This level of praise was unexpected, and he was not sure how to respond. Tony paced the room. Do you know that a well-regarded research scientist asked me who I contracted with to write your paper? Tony chuckled. I think he was nervous about his job. He might be right, too. I think you know more about this technology than he does. You must have been some student in college. I partied way too much. Hank felt a decisive answer was something that would impress Tony, though he was not sure he pulled it off. Perhaps being proud of his party-going past was a little too informal for this meeting. Tony laughed, clearly loving his candor. You know, there's a word for the person who finishes last in engineering school. Do you know what that word is? I don't, sir. An engineer, Tony said, smirking. Hank, you have a rare gift. If you spend too much of your time doing keg stands and shooting beer from the boot at university, well, that's fine. We all had our immature years. In fact, one might think that a sowing of the wild oats is to be expected, if not encouraged, so you avoid sowing them at a later date, Tony said with a wink. Thank you, sir, Hank answered. Tony stared at him again with an expression of fondness and admiration. A moment of silence followed, then he announced, I want you to present your findings at the Global Communications Conference, late spring. That's why I need you in this building. We will put Evium into production at our Davenport Works facility. Wow, Hank's expression lit up. He blushed with pride, although inwardly he was ill-prepared to handle this kind of praise. There was a part of him that believed his talents would be overlooked in life, though he hardly lacked confidence and was smarter and more talented than most people were. When his abilities were recognized, it embarrassed him. Tony beamed. I suppose the Unalco Technical Center will have a little more room for their expanding janitorial department. Does that sound good to you, Hank? Sir, I am honored. Hank did his best to hide his surprise. The Global Communicators Conference, the GCC, was a high-profile event. Unalco used it for important product announcements. It would be attended by many of the most revered publications and industry luminaries from around the world. You will need to put together a multimedia presentation on Evium, which means you should make arrangements through corporate travel to go to Davenport next week and talk to those egghead engineers out there. Coordinate your activities with Addison Moore. Do you know who she is? She was just here a bit ago. Do I ever, sir? Hank muttered, revealing perhaps too much excitement at the prospects of working with Addison. Tony obviously picked up on his boyish sentiment. His expression showed as he found it was somewhat amusing. She is the lead on the Global Communicators Conference. With her help, you will present Evium on behalf of Unalco. You will explain to the world how it works and how it will stand to change the aluminum business. Now then, Tony smiled, you should celebrate. I would suggest you indulge in any keg stand inclinations while you still can. You will be quite busy very soon, Mr. Raglan. Thank you, Sir, Hank responded with a newfound sense of pride and a slight bit of entitlement. With a hearty grasp, he shook Laporte's hand and left the office quickly for fear the venerated CEO might change his mind. After Hank left, Tony stood alone. He sighed, then picked up a copy of Hank's paper on Evium from his desktop. He rolled it up in his hand and paced the room. Gloom replaced his jovial outlook. The paternal friendly disposition that Hank had witnessed moments ago vanished. In its place was the appearance of a deeply troubled man. As he gazed out the window, Tony spoke quietly. Hank has raw gifts. No doubt about it, Larry. But he is a young man. Still, he might be our last hope. Okay, that concludes the first scene of that chapter. And that's Hank Raglan for you. You know, we finally get to meet the guy. If you listen to last week's recording, basically, he, it started off with this scene that was the death of Tony Laporte's dear friend, Dr. Bingham, who has such a central role in the whole entire series, yet he is the one that is never really in the story frame, so to speak, but everything Dr. Bingham did is research everything. After his murder in 1983, here we are years later, and Hank's picking it up. He's picking up the baton. Laporte's obviously troubled, but he sees something in Hank. So that's kind of how we get to meet Hank, and that was his big introduction into, the upper hallowed halls at Unalco. Now, this next scene of this chapter, we get to meet Jack Behrens, who is one of his primary rivals, not just at Unalco, but for Addison Moore. Let's see what happens. While Hank had his fateful talk with Tony Laporte, on a different corner of the 6th floor of Unalco's World Headquarters, a young, dark-haired, handsome man, about the same age as Hank, sat in Connor Wallrose's executive office lobby and waited with impatience. Jack Behrens, who had only joined Unalco months ago as an accountant, was nervous. He did his best to appear cool and collected. Unalco's upper echelons knew Connor for his legendary ill temperament and some said proclivity for violence. Rumor had it that a year ago he clobbered a temporary employee for screwing up a presentation. The temp was wheeling a cart of legal documents across town when his misfortune began. The unlucky fellow had picked up legal boxes at Sanderson Consulting, Unalco's downtown legal firm. He was to dolly them across the World Headquarters so that Connor could review them. That fateful afternoon, however, right when the temp pulled his box dolly onto the corner of Isabel Street, a wind gust blew the lid from the top of the box. Sensitive papers swarmed along the street in a tornado of litigation. Many documents found their way into the flowing Allegheny River, where the information was carried away to the confluence of the Ohio River and then to who knew where, the Gulf of Mexico? Anyway, just quick aside, that's kind of based on an experience I had working as a courier briefly before I had out of college for I think Pitney Bowes, and I had to run legal documents all over town, and that actually happened to me. Not quite as bad as that, but I remember a businessman standing by looking at me like, going, "Oh my God, that didn't just happen," because I had a dolly with a box of legal papers, and a big wind gust just kind of, I don't know, blew him down the street, and I was chasing him. So anyway, that was the inspiration for that little anecdote. That afternoon, Connor allegedly threw a right hook, which dropped the temp like a sack of potatoes. The temp didn't see the haymaker coming, and nobody saw the temp again. Jack recalled his own father's temperament. Rodney Pierpont Barons had been a former Golden Glove boxer in Chicago before getting into politics. Jack remembered spending more than a few days at St. Andrew's Gym in Chicago's Park District. His dad knocked out 4 or 5 boxers before he lost the contest and gave up boxing for good. Jack guessed his father discovered he could indulge in his passion for beating the tar out of folks in the ring of politics, where nobody outlawed a punch below the belt, but rather encouraged it. Some would say his father had made a good choice. After all, Rod Barons was the governor of Illinois. Jack would not praise him, though. His dad was a first-class prick. Jack wanted nothing more than to move out from under the long shadow of his father. Towards those ends, today was a special day. He would meet Connor Wallrose one-on-one for the first time. It was Jack's chance to impress this most impressive man. As he waited, he considered what led to this meeting. No doubt it was because of his accounting work. Jack was a whiz at bookkeeping and made financial losses that several questionable Unalco acquisitions incurred appear as if they were not part of the losses sustained by Unalco. Yet somehow the profits were. It was legal from a technical standpoint, but Jack was the first to admit he stretched the creative and bold use of obscure accounting loopholes that involved special purpose entities. Nonetheless, Jack banked on Connor liking his creative accounting, which, according to his own calculations, could result in millions of dollars in revenue. The door to Connor's office opened, and out stepped an unexpected stranger, a well-dressed, tall, and slender man with short-cropped blonde hair and blue eyes. His windswept face belied little emotion. Another member of Wallrose's trusted circle? Whomever he was, he did not possess the mind of a businessman. Therefore, Jack didn't bother to introduce himself. He knew these types. They would ignore him. The man did just that as he walked by, as if he didn't exist at all. Jack stood and attempted to waste more time by perusing the many awards on the opposite wall. Framed articles, plaques, and other ribbon-cutting crap decorated the walls. Jack scrutinized the wall hangings for lack of anything better to do. At last Connor's plump secretary tilted her thick, squarish head toward him. The man was ready. Jack smiled in a fake polite manner and followed the waddling administrator into Connor's office. The secretary didn't say a word as she escorted him. After he entered, she turned around. As she left, Jack noticed she regarded him with a slight hint of contempt, then closed the door, leaving him with Mr. Wallrose. Connor Wallrose meant business. The man sat tilted back in a comfortable black leather chair. Mr. Wallrose wore a handsome dark navy business suit over a dazzling white shirt ornamented with a crimson silk power tie. His shoes, up on his desk when Jack entered, belied an extravagance only highly paid executives could afford. His salt and pepper bushy hair, piercing dark eyes, and thick but well-groomed mustache framed a strong, crisp, and closely shaved face. Jack could see that Connor had an intimidating presence about him, but Jack was not intimidated at all. He had prepared for the man's well-known onerous scrutiny. "Hello, Mr. Wallrose," Jack said, standing rigid and formal. "Pleased to make your acquaintance." Connor said nothing in return. Jack knew this was a personality appraisal and waited patiently for Connor to say something. However, Connor Wallrose remained silent. He only stared at Jack. At last, Connor spoke. "I am having a party this weekend. Would you like to go?" he said. Connor's eyes drilled down on Jack as he waited for Jack's answer. The unexpected question surprised Jack, but he did his best to hide it. A party? Jack remained poised, or at least acted so. Sure, I love a good party, sir. I should warn you, though, Connor continued. It will be a wild party. Connor nodded, continuing to bore into Jack with his trademark stare. Jack felt as if Connor were appraising him, like a piece of artwork he might buy, or like a commodity of an unknown value. Fine by me, sir. There will be heavy drinking at this party, Connor said tersely. You don't have a problem with heavy drinking, do you, Jack? No, sir, Jack answered. Jack was unsure exactly where Connor was going with this line of questioning. I've been known to have a few on occasion. Connor regarded his answer in silence. Then he said, I should probably mention that there will be casual drug use at the party, Jack. You don't have a problem with casual drug use, do you, Jack? Connor rose from his chair and walked to his corner window. His back was turned to Jack now. Jack wasn't sure what answer to give. He figured he would play it safe, yet open, if that were possible. Not exactly my thing, sir, but if it works for you. Connor nodded, his back still to him. I should warn you, Jack, Connor said, turning from the window and staring at him with a practiced intensity that Jack had only seen in magazines until now. A lot of fucking will happen at my party. You will get fucked at my party. Do you have a problem getting fucked at my party? At this point, Jack couldn't help but crack his smile. Sounds like one hell of a party, sir. It sure as hell will be, Connor responded, with no indication that he had been joking at all. Jack tensed up. Maybe he was serious. Should I bring anything, sir? Jack asked. A bottle of wine, perhaps? Connor stared at him with a grave countenance on his face. Then, after a pause, he said, No, it will only be the two of us. Jack gulped and his eyes widened. What the hell did he just say? He couldn't be serious, could he? Connor scuttled over and slapped Jack on the back. I had you going there, Connor said as he howled. You sure did, Jack confessed. I'll have to admit you got me good. Uproarious juvenile laughter swirled in the room. After the knee-slapping laughter died, they settled down to talk. Okay, Jack, Connor said, pacing around the room. Let's talk biz. I understand you are one smart kid. Jack breathed a little easier. He began to explain his concept of special purpose entities and accounting methods that they could leverage to their advantage. Wallrose became quiet, serious, and keenly observant. At several points, Jack could see the man's mind working out the implications of Jack's accounting scheme and what that could mean for Unalco stock. Impressive, Mr. Barons. Quite impressive. Jack, your methods are ingenious. Thank you, sir. I want you to work exclusive with me on this project. This will be our special project. You are to talk to no one about it. Is that understood? Of course, sir. Jack Barons, who had only joined Unalco months ago as a corporate staff accountant, tried hard not to smile. At last, he had met a man that understood finances. He had no doubt that Connor Wallrose could help him escape the long shadow of his father. And there we go. That was chapter 2, Misbegotten Fortune. Okay. I'm actually going to check and see if anyone typed anything in here. Okay, where do I... Okay. So, so the thing is, that's kind of the introduction to Hank's rival, his main rival, throughout most of the Midas Protocol. It grows from there, and I will say he has now met Jack Barons, who's quite evil, as we see. He's, pretty ambitious, kind of the opposite of Hank, but equally smart and gifted, that sort of thing. And just going to see if I have any chats. I don't appear to, so good. At least that, or I'm not seeing them. So we also had a brief introduction to Addison Moore. And so essentially this chapter 2, Misbegotten Fortune, kind of hints at, both Hank and Jack are fortunate. They're both on their way up. They both caught the eye of very, very powerful, influential people within Unalco. one obviously seems to be on the up and up, and the other seems kind of open to someone that might support whatever schemes he can come up with to make money. So it kind of, sets the boundaries a little bit there between Hank as, the good protagonist. Then we have Jack as his rival on levels that we may discover that are not just Unalco, but Addison too. So it took place at Unalco. Again, what I described formerly as the Alcoa building. I used to work there back at that time was my inspiration for that scene. So it's kind of neat where that came from. And I think other inspirations for some of the material in that chapter, the temp story about the documents blowing down the street, that was me. That happened to me. Sanderson Consulting, there was that big consulting firm, the Enron bust, not Sanderson, but similar name type, firm. So that was kind of an inspiration there. I also think the whole special purpose entities thing, I was trying to kind of put my hooks onto it, like, okay, maybe Jack's kind of coordinating like an Enron type deal, but the thing that's really amazing, as the series continues, and especially as I just finished the second book, part 1 and part 2 of Call the Minotaur, which takes place 10 years after this story we're reading, is that little sentence grows into something pretty profound. Connor Wallrose mentions this will be our special project. Well, I really get into what that special project is in Call of the Minotaur, and it's a pretty far out there project. Now, at the time, as I wrote this, I'm pretty new at writing and everything, and I'm like, I don't really know what the scheme was that he was coming up with. I knew it would be kind of based on Enron, but I didn't really fully understand that. I read about it and everything. I go, okay, that sounds like I can, be vague about what he's doing and everything, which is great. And that's the beauty of the first book. For any new writers out there, whatever, you can be vague about certain things. You don't have to have the exact details worked out, but eventually you do. And so in the second book, Call of the Minotaur, that's where I really had to get into what that special project was. And another thing too, like you see, I like to put a little humor in my stories. Some of it's kind of lowbrow, perhaps. I don't know. Maybe that's more for the guys. My friends and I tend to, laugh at stuff like that. And I don't know, like me working at some corporate offices and stuff like that, we all hear jokes around the water cooler and whatever. And, in the early 80s, 90s, it was a different day and age. But one inspiration I have to give for that joke between Connor and Jack, that joke was actually, the first I heard that joke was from my brother Joe, okay, who's literally one of the funniest people you will ever meet. And and so I owe him credit for that, because I think he had told me that joke and made it more about like something that happened at a construction site and everything. So, more power to him for that, because that was really good. So there, I think you got a lot of setting up the next chapter. And, I won't go on and on about where we are now, but looking ahead, let me see what we got in store next week. You would think I would have this whole damn story memorized by now. But, okay. I definitely pretty much have the next chapter memorized. I didn't know it was hitting us right now. But next week's installment is Chapter 3, Burger Empire. And I've kind of written about that on my blog a little bit. This is basically introduces the other main protagonist of the story. And that is Caroline Friday as an investigator. And she's a young, grungy chick, and she's finding her way in life. And her connection with Hank is basically her older brother is Hank's good friend. She's like a sister to him, but they're completely different on completely different paths. And it's kind of neat to, introduce her. And it's one of the fun things as a writer is to kind of explore how their different paths, as fate would dictate, intertwine, So next week's chapter is chapter 3, Burger Empire. If I see some chats, and maybe again I'm not seeing them, I'm still new at this thing, I'll answer them. But I appreciate you checking this out. This is a lot of fun for me to do. I hope you're enjoying it, and I appreciate you. Thank you.